This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. I hope y'all are having a great week and absolutely making things happen out on the campaign trail. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe and review the podcast. It's by far the best way to help get out the word about what we're doing, and I'd personally greatly appreciate it. Now, before we get started with Representative Matt Rinaldi, I want to thank Campaign Sidekick for supporting this podcast. Visit campaignsidekick.vote to find out how their best-in-breed voter contact platform can revolutionize your campaign and help you win. In addition to establishing a nationwide client base, Sidekick was named by the Republican National Committee as one of their 5 approved and tested voter contact platforms. Definitely something y'all should check out for your ground game. Texas State Representative Matt Rinaldi has represented the northwest portion of Dallas County since he was elected in late 2014. Now, he lost his first race, changed his campaign strategy, and came back to beat the incumbent in a rematch the following cycle. That was even though his opponent spent over $1 million. Matt earned a bachelor's in economics from the James Madison University and his law degree from Boston University School of Law. Like myself, he married well out of his league, and they were blessed by the addition of young Benjamin Rush Rinaldi to their family around the same time that my son Stoney was born. Representative Rinaldi is a trusted source on constitutional issues and has spoken extensively on these matters throughout the state and on Fox News radio affiliates throughout the country. He's a strong advocate for limited government, pro-liberty and free market policies, secure borders, education, Second Amendment rights, and the protection of life. Matt's a good friend of mine and a former client. Let's bring him on. Representative, thanks for joining us here on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Man, we've known each other for a good number of years now. I think maybe since 2012 or something like that. And you got elected at 14, and you've been doing awesome work in the state house ever since. And it's I've been doing the podcast for a year and a half. I can't believe I'm just now recently got around to invite you on. That's a terrible oversight on my part. Well, it's good to have you. Now, you, like me, you've recently become a father. You got a little one. Rush is his name, right?
Yes,
and
Benjamin Rush Rinaldi.
I love it. Back to the founding fathers, and he's about 6 months or 7 months.
He's 6 months old. Yep,
that's awesome. Pretty much same age as my little Stoney, and so we were just chatting offline a little bit about fatherhood and the fun of that. And I tell you what, if there's one big hero in all this, it's our wives, because they are rock stars, and it's God bless them.
I know, seriously.
Oh, I cannot believe the amount of the lack of sleep and the hard work they do every day. So God bless all the moms out there. Every day should be Mother's Day.
Every time I see a single mother on the campaign trail now, I just give them a big hug.
Amen to that, man. Yeah, I was talking to my wife not too long ago about, she's like, I don't understand. I have a hard time sometimes believing that I'm able to do all this. And she's like, then I remember that I have a husband and family and support, and I don't have to work. And she's like, just God bless the moms out there that don't have, all those blessings. But
yes,
let's. So I want to find out more about your backstory. So I obviously know some of it from knowing you for a number of years, but walk me through kind of your background and how you got involved in politics and what kind of brought you up to running for office back in 2014.
Well, I originally ran for office in 2012. I'd always been interested in politics. Since, gosh, I can remember watching Jimmy Carter give presidential speeches when I was a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old. And I remember following the first election I really followed was the 1984 election when Ronald Reagan won. So I'd always been interested in politics. I was an activist in college. And when the 1994 Republican sweep happened, people don't often realize that Republicans hadn't controlled the legislature since I think it was the 40s before that, or the 30s. So, it was a time of hope. And then when we took both houses of the legislature, they didn't really deliver on their campaign promises. So, it was frustrating. And then that made me want to get into politics. And my theory was, if Republicans get in office, do what they say they're going to do, the economy is going to flourish. We're going to create jobs, and the country's going to be better off for it. And that's the way you win re-election, not by doing what, some of the people in Washington were doing. So I ended up running for office in 2012. I got beat because I didn't campaign the right way. So I ran for an open seat in 2012. Then the guy who beat me was an incumbent. I ran against him again and was drastically outspent the second time. I had everything against me and I won. So apparently the changes I made worked. So, and then won another term running in a primary against the same guy 2 years ago.
Man, yeah. Well, that was a pattern that a lot of our guys had with Matt Krause and others that had run once. They lost. I actually remember the first time I met Matt. He came through at a training event that I did, and myself, my boss at the time, because Matt was looking at running against Kay Granger for her congressional seat, and we told him, well, Matt, a couple things. One, you need to run for state house, not Congress. So that's number one, balloon pop. Number two, you're gonna run for state house and you're gonna lose, and then you're gonna run again and you're gonna win. And I'm really not sure why he talked to me again after that, because that's popping a lot of balloons at once. But that's exactly how it played out. And I think there's some great lessons that you can share with the listeners about what changed in your outlook. Let's start out. One of the questions that I always like to ask people, and knowing your bride and how involved she is with you and your political life, as well as helping you just as a man. Well, one of the questions that I always ask candidates is your spouse on board? And because I won't work, much like Luke Macias, who's done a lot of work with you, we won't work with anybody whose spouse isn't on board. And that's not just in okay, sure. We want to make sure that whatever their level of involvement or what it looks like on the outside, that emotionally, spiritually, physically, that they're part of that and you're doing it together. Talk a little bit how that developed, your passion and interest in running for office developed with you and your bride, and how you guys talked about that and really came up with the decision to run in 12.
Well, she when she married me, she knew what she was getting into because I had warned her about it. So that was part of when we met, what she knew what I had aspired to and wanted to do in the future. And to be honest, it was in 2009 when the economy crashed. It was lawyers that were 8th, 8th year lawyers in big firms just got butchered. So, we got I ended up getting laid off because of the economic downturn. It was a tough time. And I figured we had some time. So I ran for judge, Republican ticket in Dallas County, which is basically a suicide mission. But, it got us to meet so many new people. Even though it was a losing campaign, we knew it probably was going to be. She got involved in that. We didn't know anybody at first, and then we just knew everybody. And then I ran in 2012 and was favored. I talked to her about it. I always wanted to run for state house. She was on board because she knew it was something that I had wanted to do. So she was very supportive of it. And we block walked some. We didn't block walk enough in the open seat, which is why we ended up losing despite having equal amounts of money. And then in 2014, we ran again, and I just said I was just going to block walk, and that was it. That was the part I liked the best. It was the part I could get myself up to do. So we did that and ended up getting outspent 10-1 and ended up winning. And my wife walked almost as many doors as I did, I think.
I feel like that's one of those things that the preachers for possible potential political candidates should just insert that in the vows, to have and to hold in primaries and generals, and just have the election side just kind of wrapped up there in the vows. Because in your case, that was implicit. I like that.
Except
that was
she would get gifts when she would block walk. I have no idea she would block walk and come back with potted plants, homemade salsa. I have awesome. No idea what she was doing in there. One time she was actually helping somebody put up their drapes.
Oh my gosh.
It was so by the time it was election day, half the people would come up and say, you came to my door. Half the people would come up and say, your wife came to my door.
That's great. Well, the candidate getting out there in most cases, block walking is the best possible thing. And the spouse is, the second best just because they're the closest one to the candidate. But maybe in your case, the opposite was true. I think Corley was probably the best one to get out there block walking for you.
She was as awesome. Good as I was at pulling votes at the door. Definitely. Yeah, it was an equal thing. It's so we'd actually count it as a candidate door walked if she was actually there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I mean, when I think about the ways to run a campaign, there's a lot of different ways to have spouses involved. And having talked to Matt Krause and Jonathan Stickland, and now yourself, all three of y'all have wives that are really involved, but each in very different ways. And Corley is the one that at least from my perspective, has been the most involved in the actual running of the campaign. Part of that probably has been that they've during their earlier political life they've had more children, and so their wives have done a lot more with them and had other responsibilities. But it's kind of interesting just getting to know a bunch of you guys and seeing the different ways that wives are involved. I think it's really important for the listeners to know that there is no cookie cutter there, that it's really truly what works best for y'all and what makes you both most comfortable, what you're best at. And it sounds like just from knowing the two of you guys that it was a pretty clear the way that she would be most useful and really enjoyed helping the most.
Oh yeah, absolutely. She was in there on everything.
That's awesome. She's really cool, and for anybody that gets to meet her that's listening, she's a rock star and way cooler than Matt is, which is the same thing as my wife's way cooler than I am. So I understand that situation. Now, you mentioned block walking, and folks who listen to the podcast know these are like my favorite words, definitely my favorite campaign activity. Talk about how you said that's something you didn't do in your first race. It's the vast majority of your focus in the second race. What was it that kind of led to you seeing that shift, or that shift in your opinion on the subject?
Luke Macias. I had a different consultant in my first race too, and didn't really emphasize it. Was kind of saying, you can wait till later to do it and everything. So by the time I got it done, I got about probably 1,200 houses, maybe 1,000 by the end of the race. I had spent a lot of time trying to raise money. And to be honest, I had to put in a lot of my own money for the first race. The money didn't come when I wasn't block walking. It was harder to find volunteers. And it was, I'd spend a lot of my time on the phone, just trying to call people and raise money. The second race, Luke had me block walking more. I enjoyed doing it. I hated raising money and talking to strangers and asking them for help like that. And I just block walked all day. And I said, forget it. If I raise the money, I raise the money. If I don't, I don't. At least I'll block walk. And I walked to 4,000 or 5,000 houses by the end of the campaign. Basically hit my whole voting base in the off-year election. And to be honest, I didn't have to put any of my own money in that race because the enthusiasm was so high, because everybody, kind of knew me by that time, that I raised the money. So it was a completely different campaign. It was like everything else trailed off of the block walking, and the money, the enthusiasm, the volunteers. When I was block walking, all of that was high. When I was focused on the other things, it wasn't.
So that's pretty cool, and I think something a lot of people don't anticipate it. In a way, it's counterintuitive. But you're saying that what you saw is that by block walking, the relationships and the contact you were having really fed a fire there, that then all of a sudden the people you're talking to and the people they're sharing your information with are now saying, man, this is somebody I want, now that I know him, now that I've seen him out and seen him working hard and got to talk to him, I want to volunteer, I want to raise money, I want to donate to. You're saying that followed the block walking and really helped fuel that second campaign.
Absolutely. And even the people outside of the district too, who are, I guess, in smoke-filled rooms in Austin trying to figure out what the race is going to be, they're doing polling. So that block walking showing up in their polling, and when, the conservative groups are looking, going, oh, this race is close, then all of a sudden you do get more money from the conservative donors, and that leads to bigger, better things.
I think when here in Texas, we've had multiple cycles in a row where we had between 20 and 30 or so conservative campaigns that were in cycle, that were, we had good people running, and we were contesting seats. And so when you're looking at that, if you're a donor or really anybody that's interested in helping, you got to decide where are my resources best put. And the activity when it comes to block walking is one of the most tangible ways to measure that. And I know a number of donors here in Texas and PACs and stuff, they monitor carefully what campaigns are doing door to door in order to help them figure out, hey, who's working hard, because we want to be a force multiplier, and we can't lift them by ourselves, but we can help put them over the top if they're putting in the shoe leather.
Yeah. Yeah. And it, what's also nice is it insulates you against the negative attacks that inevitably come, especially if you're against an incumbent that has a ton of money.
Yeah. kind of, balance each other out at a certain point if you don't know the people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I even had I even had more of an onslaught. I mean, my opponent had raised almost $1 million. I think it was like $800,000, and I had about 75 of non-in-kind actual donations to spend the whole race. So it was just withstanding an onslaught of 2-3 weeks of just saturation. I mean, there were 3 ads per hour, every radio station. There were ads on TV constant. We didn't even watch TV for 3 weeks.
Gosh.
I mean, they had a Super Bowl ad in the local ad buys during the Super Bowl. That's how much money they spent on trying to trash me, and the block walking insulated against that.
Well, and for folks that are not from Texas that may not understand how big a deal it is, TV ads, even in metro areas for state house campaigns, are not very common. They're not usually a great use of money, but in this case, his opponent had so much of it that not only was it a good use of money, it was about the only way they could spend it all. And so they were able to just saturate things, which is pretty unheard of. I don't know of another campaign where on state house level they've done that.
Yeah, and a lot of it had to do too with the fact that they didn't know they were in trouble until late. I know in December they thought I was in the race just to try to pay off my campaign debts from the previous race, and they didn't know how much I was block walking because I stayed out of my opponent's area until the end. So by the time all the polling came back, they had no idea why it was really close. And then tried to make a bunch of ad buys, but the cable TV stuff was already sold out, so they ended up buying network.
Oh my gosh! Well, and that was a crazy election cycle too. It was kind of unclear. We figured we'd have high turnout, but with Trump and Cruz both being on the ballot in a hot, active national primary for president, our turnout, I know in some cases, was 200% of normal, even for a presidential year.
Oh, yeah, that was my re-election, though. This is the first time when I was outspent. That was the 2014 election.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we had about 8,000 people vote in that primary. In the presidential primary, we had about double that. You're right.
Yeah. Man, 8,000. So you got less than 4,000 votes and you spent $1 million. That's quite a bit per vote. They had to make some kind of record.
It was very interesting.
Gosh. Yeah, that's
I won by 92 votes, actually.
Oh, man. Gosh, I've told the story frequently, but the first campaign I ever helped out on, I was 10 years old, and we lost by 12 votes. And you definitely don't want to be on the other side of that margin. You want to know you did everything you can. And I remember seeing you squeak that one out, and that was wild.
I did not think it was going to. Well, we had like 5 precincts left at midnight to report. And I remember I was up 20 votes, but 4 of the 5 precincts were in my opponent's hometown that he was winning 60-40.
Oh.
So I thought we had lost. I already told my wife we lost, and then they came back, and on election day, it was actually I had more votes than he did in those precincts. So I don't know what happened. He got his people out early, I guess.
Man, one of those things that we've seen in some cases is just that momentum, and some of it comes from that heavy get out the vote block walking. Is you know your name ID is increasing, and you're seeing more and more people that are making decisions late, and you get that bump. I know we had this election that was just passed in one of the congressional races. Dan Crenshaw, he's running for Ted Poe's open seat, and they were. He squeaked past Kathleen Wall that spent like $5 million in the primary, and the way their early voting numbers were way lower than theirs, but they just crushed their election day, and they just had that momentum building. Chip Roy, very similarly, down in the CD21 open seat, he did well during early voting, but he absolutely crushed it in election day, and it was all momentum building straight through. It's part of why, much like a sprinter, on the track, you can't, just because you're getting close to the finish line or even crossing it, you can't let up. You gotta the stop point, or when you let up, is like 10 yards past the finish line, because you don't want any break in momentum in those last couple of strides.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about the block walking, a little bit about what that's important. As you look at that, your experience running for state house and running for judge, and all the different experience that built up to winning in 14. what were some of the other takeaways you had? I mean, I know that you talked about having experience with different consultants and some different strategies there with raising money, with block walking. What were some, you're thinking to our listeners who are either running for office or considering it or helping run campaigns, what are some of the things that you learned that might be helpful there?
Well, I mean, one is choosing the right consultant, someone that meshes, someone that's not only skilled, but meshes with your personality. One of the good things about Luke is I'm always the pessimist, and he's always a good optimist and someone who can reason his optimism fairly well. So, I would, I'd call him and the world was ending, and he'd be like, "Oh, this is the same thing that happened to Stickland a couple of years ago," and then I would feel better again and get all revved up and go out and block walk some more. I remember the first election. There was one time when we were, my consultant would want to, obviously most people are more optimistic and they think everything's great, and the consultant's there to tell them where the pitfalls possibly are. But with me, my wife comes home, I'm in the dark watching Netflix one day.
In the fetal position over on the couch.
I'm like, oh, the world's over. It's over. It's all over. So you got to find someone who actually fits your personality and motivates you to actually do all this work, because it's tough when you're in it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, they pick a consultant, they look at the win rate, they look at one meeting, but then I don't think they really look at how intimate a relationship it really is. Especially when you're talking about these kind of races, you're spending a lot of time being influenced by their activity because they're doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, them and their team, but there's a whole lot of communication in most cases. A lot of those phone calls and text messages, you're having to either build people up or pull them back a little bit, depending on which side of that optimism, whether they're more the youre side or the just bundles of joy, and really staying focused. And you're going from oftentimes having no previous relationship to being in a foxhole with somebody, sharing real intimate relationship. And how do you do that? I mean, I think you'd known Luke maybe a little bit beforehand, but talk a little about, so prior to engaging him, talk about how that relationship grew over time and kind of what you really liked about that.
Well, I mean, I didn't really know him before. I think I met him once before I hired him during the initial race. And when I hired him, I was just impressed with what he did the last election cycle. He was more playing to my strengths, I guess. Most consultants try to tone you down and get you to say less and be careful of what you're saying. And that really is reflected in the way you govern in a lot of people, because that's basically what the U.S. Congress is, right?
Yeah.
A bunch of people trying to temper their actual beliefs and look reasonable in public. One thing that was good about Luke and was a good fit is one of my strengths is being able to talk boldly in a way that makes sense. That was one of the things he would encourage, and with the knowledge that, sometimes when you do that, you're going to slip up, or, there'll be a little media outcry or something like that once in a while. But overall, it's who you are and it's your strength.
Yeah, I think making sure that you're able to communicate who you are. I mean, voters typically want somebody that is like them, that shares their values, is smarter than them, but doesn't act like it. A piece of advice Dr. Mark Campbell gave me a while back on one of these episodes, and I think that, especially today when we see so many politicians that won't say what they believe, or at least that what they say they believe we can't really trust, that when there's somebody that's willing to speak boldly, to be themselves, and to not be afraid to offend somebody just because they're saying what they believe. I think people reward that in many cases. They definitely did with you. I think they do with Stickland, with folks like Briscoe and others that we've seen here in the state. People that are willing to stand for what they believe in, and whether that's what all the voters believe or not, at least they have an option to vote for somebody who's not going to be cowed into submission. They're going to actually try to represent, their beliefs and their voters.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things too that you can't underestimate is likability as well. And Luke and I always get into discussions over this, where my theory is that given the same amount of money, the same amount of work, the more or even comparable amounts of money, comparable amounts of work, the more likable candidate's always going to win, regardless of politics and policy.
Yeah.
And people, I mean, we have local candidates here who are so focused on what their platform is going to be. And I try to focus them away from it and say, listen, just keep it simple with the platform. You are going to win the election with your personality.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that. And it was because after the elections, me and Luke will go down the list, and it turns into this thing where I'm trying to look if we're right or wrong. And then we get into these arguments over which of the two candidates in a race is actually a more likable person.
Yeah.
to test the theory. So
I think you're right. I mean, when you look at, especially this past election, I think that bears it out. And I remember Senator Bob Hall, I was talking to him at a dinner a couple months ago, and we were talking about the podcast and stuff and wanting to have him on. And he said, well, Raz, remember, tell everybody that it's more important that they like you than they agree with you on everything. And that's 100% true, because there's nobody that's agree with you on everything. But I mean, heck, most of the time we have a hard time agreeing with ourselves on everything. We change opinions and go back and forth on stuff. But if someone likes you, if they believe you're somebody that has character in your soul, that you have some kind of fixed principles, then they're going to think you're going to do all right most of the time. And that's pretty valuable. Plus, frankly, I think that for a lot of people, it's much easier to build the likability factor than try to convince them they agree with you on 90 or even 95% of the issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the important thing, and people want somebody who will listen as well. I mean, I remember we were at the door of one guy. I was with my wife this time, and she just sat and stayed quiet, but I could tell what the look on her face as the guy exclaimed that he didn't like conservatives, he didn't like Christians, and he didn't like pro-life Republicans. So I explained to him, well, I'm more conservative, I am Christian, and I am pro-life, but can I get your vote? And he goes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, okay, bye.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how some people make up decisions about voting. I mean, something like that, as somebody that votes very much based on the principles and the beliefs of who I'm voting for, it blows my mind when I hear stories like that. But it happens every time, and it's one of those things where you would not have got that guy's vote if you hadn't knocked on his door. Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't make sense. Some of them. I mean, I remember one guy who put my sign in his yard. He was probably one of the most liberal Republican primary voters I've ever spoken to. And he put my sign in his front yard with his Hillary Clinton sign last election. And then for the general election, he was out working the polls for my opponent, my Democrat opponent. But yet he voted for me in the Republican primary and put a sign in his front yard. So
Wow.
None of the voting behavior necessarily makes sense. We try to attribute some sort of sense to it. There isn't always.
No.
We did a recount one time in a local race, which was one of the most eye-opening things to me. It was in the city of Irving, and the mayor, Beth Van Dyne, who a lot of people know as the more conservative wing, it aligned with Stephen Jones, who's our conservative Irving ISD member, and they had two more liberal opponents, right? So Beth had a liberal opponent, and Steve did. Well, Steve and Beth won their elections by comparable percentages. So our view was, we brought out more conservatives. When we did this recount on this other race, you had probably 50% of the people voting for Beth and Stephen Jones's opponent, or voting for Beth's opponent and the conservative for school board. So it made no sense whatsoever. None of the ballots when you actually saw the physical ballots. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah,
a lot of people's voting behavior doesn't make sense.
I remember back in, I guess it would have been 2012. We were doing a bunch of work in the race. Wendy Davis, she ran for it was the last time running for the Senate seat before Connie got that seat. And in that general election, you had Romney on the ballot, and you had Craig Goldman as a state rep candidate. And there was a significant number of people who voted for Romney at the top, and they voted for Wendy Davis, the Democrat for state Senate, and then they switched back. And that pattern virtually never happens. You might have somebody that would vote and switch, but they don't switch back. That's just hardly ever heard of. But in their case, there are a lot of local folks that just felt like they knew Wendy, and she was a local girl, so they vote for her. And in spite of the fact that her values were 180 degrees off from Goldman or Romney.
Yeah.
And you're like, how does that make sense? But a lot of people went for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's my district. Hillary Clinton won my district by 8 points last election, and I won by 2. So I polled probably 3 or 4,000 Hillary Clinton voters. I have no idea who these people are.
Don't you just want to
But
meet these people at some point and just be like, why?
why?
Yeah,
I know.
that'd be a
And
fun
it would,
focus
even
group.
in the primary that happened as well. It was the same election that Don Huffines and John Corona were going at it pretty heavily. And Don Huffines' best area in my district was my worst area. Yeah, we would campaign together.
Wow.
So in Don Huffines' bad area, there were all of these houses with John Corona, Matt Rinaldi sign pairings. And Don would come to the door and just be like, "Why?" Well, we like Matt, and we like John.
Wow. I think one of the lessons there is, talking about all these weird yard sign pairings, is just because you see somebody that doesn't align with you, or even your opponent signing somebody's yard, don't just chalk it up as a lost vote. Make the effort to at least go introduce yourself, because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, half the time. I mean, I went to doors with my opponent's sign on it, and we were like, "Oh, well, he came to the door," and I just said he could put a sign. You could put a sign up too, so then they have both opponents' signs in the front yard.
Yeah. It's weird what happens, but I definitely, one of the nice things one of the things you know for sure is that at least folks that have a sign out they're willing to put out signs, and they might be a little bit more engaged than normal, and they're at least willing to put something out there. So go talk to them, at least introduce yourself. And if they're fixed on the other guy, you just being kind and sharing a little bit of information about yourself and tell them to have a good day might at least soften any boogeyman view that the other guys gave them of you.
Yeah, maybe they won't talk to all their friends or
Yeah.
be motivated to make an extra phone call
Right.
if you aren't that bad.
So you won these heavily contested races. It's been crazy. Your race is shaping up to be probably one of the most competitive general election races here in Texas on the state house level. It's probably the one that's going to be closest, or just as far as how the numbers are shaping up. When you look at that, we'll get to talking about your tenure in the legislature here in a moment. But when you look at that, not asking for any secret sauce here, but block walking seems to be a key part of what you're trying to do. What are the main things that you want to show your district and that you're going to be trying to communicate to them?
You mean policy-wise, or?
Just out of the campaign, whether it's policy, whether it's personality, what are the different things about you that you want to communicate?
I mean, I think you want to meet as many people as possible personally, so they know that you're available and that you listen, whether you agree with them or not. I think that's very important. And a lot of reps don't do it. They don't meet with everybody who asks. That's what I do. If you ask to meet with me, I'll schedule a personal meeting with you. Some people say, I actually don't even do many. I've done 2 town halls, I think. I don't do many town halls, and people ask why. Is it because I personally meet with every single person who asks?
Yeah.
So I do individual town halls. So I think that's very important in terms of issues. Now, I try to. I'm obviously a conservative. I motivate the conservative base. But there's a lot of issues that are really bipartisan that are at the front of the governor's agenda and the Republican agenda, like property taxes. Everybody's concerned with high property taxes, and I think that's going to be one of the main issues. That, as well as education, school finance, and the like. So I think the issues come very easy, and I think they favor Republicans in the general.
So as you're looking at this campaign that's shaping up, one of the things that I always ask candidates, I think one of the most important sets of questions that I see in every race is 3 whys. It's like why you're running, why you're running now, and why is this office the one that you seek. And I'd love to kind of get a little bit of feel from you about what your why is. As far as you're now, this is what you're running for your 4th term, is that right? Third term, run for your 3rd term. I can't count, apparently. And so you're still motivated to go through this meat grinder again, and you got a young son at home, got a wife at home, you have your business. Why do you want to do this? Why is this worth it for you?
Well, I mean, obviously it's the young son at home and the type of world he's going to inherit. Texas has been so extraordinarily successful in promoting a vibrant economy and creating jobs and in expanding economic growth more than any other state in the country the last 10 years. And we've attracted so many more new people to Texas. But, we want to make sure that continues into the future. And likewise, we want to make sure that, the culture that made us America continues into the future. And, I want my son to grow up in a country that values justice, personal responsibility, strength. And I see that those values are under attack right now. So I think there's no greater time that I would want to be in office. And in fact, this office is so much more important because I see the federal government as not being the source of any movement in policy at all. Congress is 2/3 of the government is on autopilot. Congress seems to be going along with the motions. Most of our laws come from the administrative state. So in the state level, we pass more bills than Congress do. We affect more policy, I think, than Congress does here in Texas and locally. And, one person or a group of 12 people, as we saw last election, can affect so much. There's no other office you can affect this much. So I think, the time it is and the amount of policy you can affect, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Well, I definitely appreciate the kind of work you're willing to do there. Some people may not be aware, but it's pretty much an unpaid position. And it takes a lot of your time. You got 140 days at least every other year. Then you got all the campaign time. You got the time meeting with constituents one-on-one like you do. And all the while you got to feed your family and got to do the things you got to do to be a good dad. And we're blessed with a lot of great people. Many of your friends in the state house and state senate and elsewhere here in Texas, just public servants across the country who are willing to do that. And I think that what I hope is that we'll see more and more men and women of principle who actually believe something and want to stand up for it, who are going to stand up and take on those challenges. And so I'm excited by that because I'm in the same boat as you. 6-month-old son. I'm like, man, we got to do something.
I know.
I thought it was important before it. Now I'm looking around like, oh my gosh, we got to.
I'm terrified. Even when you're watching cartoons, some of the stuff they slip into cartoons nowadays, even with the culture hitting you over the head with everything, it's tough. It's gonna be a tough life for our kids if we don't do something.
I agree. So let's look at after you got elected. Now you've been working for several years to get there. You get the votes. You won 2014 general with a pretty good margin, and now here we are, November of 14, and here in a couple months you've got to have a functioning office. You've got to learn all the legislative rules and how to get things done and how to not let your bills get killed, where to sit, where the bathrooms are. You got a lot of stuff. In the middle of that, you got to hire a staff, many or most of whom you've never met before, and have a functioning operation that's ready to kick butt for your constituents come the first part of January. How in the world do you do that?
Well, your consultant helps a lot, or at least my consultant helped a lot. Helped pair me up with a great chief of staff who had a lot of experience, and she basically runs my office day to day, knew everything going on, from the first day. So that was very important to me, rather than having a chief of staff that didn't have any experience. So I left a lot to her, and she's one of the best people I've worked with, and in my career outside of politics also, and a self-motivator. So that helped a lot. And then once you're there, I'm a lawyer, so a lot of it came easy. And to be honest, a lot of people don't like lawyers in the legislature, but if you are a lawyer who's a conservative, it does make it easier to catch on, and the learning curve's less because, the skills involved in doing a committee hearing is basically, being an appellate judge on a panel. It's the same thing. You're questioning, you're trying to get the truth of the matter. Questioning someone from the back mics, like cross-examination, laying out a bill is like, basically laying out an appellate argument. So the learning curve on a lot of these things was a little less just because I had done it as a litigator. But yeah, still overwhelming when you're in the Capitol and,
right.
Being the center of attention. So, the first session, the rules you can read, but you're not really understanding it until you've actually gotten through it. So, the first session I think was great. I think as a freshman, I got the hang of it, more than most freshmen do. But still, I think the second session was when we actually, started getting our footing and strategically started using the rules to our advantage to change policy.
And as part of that, within the conservative wing of the Republican Party, you guys and the Freedom Caucus folks like Krause and Matt Schaefer and Stickland have been in the majority party, but really in a minority position because the Democrats often work with the more liberal Republicans to keep the conservative reforms from happening there in the state house. And here's crossing fingers that we have a different situation with a new speaker next cycle, but that's what it's been like for the last couple of years. One of the things that I'm always a big fan of is looking at the procedural side of legislating, and especially your strategic ability to kill bad things or to use the rules to really influence the broader picture. Look at the full board type thing. And that's something that I feel like you guys really crushed it at this last cycle, in this last session, and it kind of culminated with the local and consent calendar, and you guys having a showdown there. Talk a little bit about what was at stake, why you guys chose to do something that ticks so many people off, and what that actually accomplished, because I think it's a pretty cool story, and I think it did a lot of good.
Well, we started, there were a few times where things came to a head, and since we don't have influence over what comes to the floor of the House, a lot of it has to do with just using leverage against the people who do have control over what comes to the floor of the House. And one of the pieces of leverage we had was being able to kill bills on local and consent calendar, which, by the way, creates a huge issue, with lobbyists who have clients who are interested in stability, and the speaker himself is interested in stability, because that's what he touts as a moderate, right? He wants to be reasonable, he wants to be stable, and he wants to be a statesman. Well, if you got people that are able to disrupt the proceedings, well, that doesn't really work out for him.
No.
So his big, he pushed back on us, basically saying, you don't have the guts to do this. And we said, au contraire, we will kill 200 bills regardless of content, unless you, and actually, I think the ask was pass some of the younger guys, Freedom Caucus members, local bills, and pass my church security bill, or we're going to kill the local and consent calendar. He said, you wouldn't dare. We did. And it became the Mother's Day massacre. And incidentally, by the way, after that happened, the chair of the calendars committee realized that she doesn't really have a committee if we kill all her local bills. So she started putting our members' bills on local and consent calendar after that. And I passed my church security bill anyway as a rider on another bill. So the speaker got nothing out of that whole thing other than basically hurting himself and increasing our power in the chamber.
Well, and what you guys did there is, for folks that may not be aware, you basically took some, stuff that had to get passed and that everybody wanted to get passed. It non-consent wise, nobody really disagreed on. And so that's what the local consent calendar is made up of. Basically, typically non-controversial and some must-pass legislation that nobody gets their panties in a wad about. And because the speaker and the calendars committee had said, basically, screw y'all, we're not going to, if your name's on it, we're not going to touch it. You went to them and said, look, well, we're willing to do this. We're willing to shoot the hostage. And they said, you wouldn't dare. You called their bluff. And that forced some major changes that you got a lot of good stuff out of it. There's a lot of people that got ticked about it, but fundamentally, you were standing up for the people you represented and the principles you said you believed in. And you said, look, if this is a tool at our disposal and we don't have another way of accomplishing these things, and then we got to.
Yeah. I mean, if those bills were that important, also, they would have gotten passed by the Senate. And a lot of the Senate versions did get passed, and the important stuff eventually did. But yeah, that's exactly what we did. And it was interesting because later that night, we ended up having the filibuster, which had nothing to do with the original killing of the local bills, but actually was quite a bold move after we had already done that. So later on that night, there were a lot of bills that the speaker was holding up that the lieutenant governor had already passed. And there's a continuation of government bill that we have to pass every legislative session called the Sunset Safety Net, which basically it continues agencies like the Texas Medical Board that we need an extra 2 years. At about 9 o'clock, at the deadline to pass House bills was midnight, we discovered that that bill was 6 bills away. And if we killed that bill, it would put power in the lieutenant governor's hands to basically force a special session by not passing the Senate sunset safety net.
And so then you guys filibustered and you forced a special session as a result.
Yeah, an impromptu. Well, we allowed Lieutenant Governor Patrick to force a special session, which a 3-hour impromptu filibuster when it usually takes 5 minutes to pass a bill. So we would have gotten through that in probably 20 minutes. We had a stall for 3 hours, and we were talking about some trade school teacher licensing bill. And nobody knew what we were doing, and we couldn't tell them because that would hurt our ability to kill the bill we wanted to kill. So everybody was looking at us. They thought this was a continuation of the killing of the local bills, and we were doing it just to be jerks, basically. They turned up the heat in the House chamber to 85 degrees.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody was looking at us. I've never gotten looks like this before in my life. It was the most uncomfortable I've ever been. And people don't realize that when you're going through it, you don't know the result, right? So
No.
we could have gotten to the point where they actually passed the bill and all this was for naught, and we look like idiots.
Yeah.
So it's a huge risk doing this. And it's certainly not guaranteed. I mean, I remember turned over to Stickland with like 10 or 15 minutes left to go. And I said, we're like 1 or 2 bills away. I'm going to fake a heart attack if I need to. And I looked at him, I'm like, I'm seriously hitting the floor, clutching my chest. So just to let you know.
Call the paramedics, act surprised.
I'm like, I mean, because the thought of failing after doing this for 3 hours in the spotlight, is just unthinkable. So it was very interesting. I could tell why so many legislators don't want to go about it that way, just because it's risky personally.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you run the risk of looking stupid. There were plenty of people that were angry with you for doing that, for forcing a special session. But at the end of the day, the things that you were sent down there to get done weren't getting done. And so you have these rules, you have these ways of maneuvering that are there. You got to use them. And that's where your legal background, I imagine, was very helpful in understanding the rules. That's why having chiefs of staff and staffers that understand the rules, understand parliamentary procedure, that can be very, very helpful, because whether it's looking for points of order, whether it's trying to make sure that you're not going to get PO'd, or looking for ways to kill stuff that are relatively novel, those are all ways of getting the job done for your constituents that few people take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you got to do what that's all that I think the voters want when they're frustrated with Republicans not doing what they said they were going to do. They're frustrated with leadership, but they're also frustrated with the people not in leadership and not doing everything they can to follow through with their campaign promises.
Yeah.
And they're more worried about, when we're talking about worried about getting reelected, it just means you're not willing to sacrifice yourself. And it's kind of like being a running back on a football team and playing like you're scared of being injured. You're not going to be good. You're not going to perform.
Yeah, you got to be willing to take that hit, just lay yourself out. Your body is a missile. Use it. And that's the whole ethos of being a running back,
Exactly. I mean, you have to do it strategically, right? I mean, you got to call a play. You can't just but you can't be worried about yourself.
Yeah. Well, and part of the reason this came to mind was I was recently made aware of a city councilman that he said he was against this bond, but he voted with the rest of the council to put it on the ballot. And that just struck me as something that's just awful. Because I was like, look, if you're against this, if you think this would be bad for the city, then you don't vote to allow it to go up, especially knowing how frequently those things pass and the poor margin of voters that turn out. It's like if you think it's bad, use every procedural means at your disposal to kill it. Otherwise, you don't really think it's that bad. You'd rather trade off and allow that thing to get through and maintain the sense of camaraderie and unanimity amongst your colleagues. They're voting for it because ostensibly they think it's a good idea or they're cool with it. You voting with them because we're going along with this or allowing something to happen when you have a procedural tool to at least signal your disapproval, I think is just foolish and pretty disappointing.
Yeah, it's a cop-out. So he's basically saying, oh, don't worry, the voters will take care of it if it's a bad idea. And people do that in the legislature all the time. So they'll have a terrible bill in committee and They'll look at it and go, oh, I'll vote for it in committee because if it's bad, they'll take care of it in the House floor. And then the people in the House will go, we'll just pass it. And if it's bad, the Senate will take care of it. And then the Senate will say, the governor will veto it if it's bad. And nobody ever kills this bill and it ends up getting passed because nobody's willing to take a stand against it because they don't want to upset the author who might vote against their bill. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah, but like I said, it happens every single cycle, lots of times, as it turns out.
Yeah.
I think that's one of those reasons where we have to have, when I'm looking at candidates, I want to see somebody has a backbone and has a set of things they actually believe in and that they're willing to sacrifice for. Because if you're not willing to sacrifice what you believe in, even in the small things, like ticking off an author and having to go to him and say, look, I'm sorry, I don't believe in this, then you really don't belong in elected office.
No. And by the way, this isn't about like compromising, not compromising ever, or being completely uncompromising. It's about getting the best compromise or the best result you can. So, I mean, a lot of times what we're doing is, establishing a very aggressive bargaining position on a particular bill. And, nobody ever got a good compromise if you come in saying, okay, we're going to compromise.
Right.
No.
Somehow that's what the Democrats and liberals always want us to do. That they really push hard in the media to make sure that's our bargaining position coming in. And all too frequently, especially when we look at D.C., that's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
No
exactly.
surprise we get such crappy deals. But
yeah, I mean, when we were doing the sanctuary city bill too, we realized we didn't have the votes to make the bill stronger initially, and Representative Schaefer and I, we're going to compromise to get the best deal we could. The Democrats wanted to play politics and were more concerned with putting on a show for some protesters that were coming in, so they rejected our compromise. Because of that, the Republicans got angry, and we realized we got the votes because they turned down the compromise, and we ended up rolling over them and passing the strongest sanctuary city bill in the country because of the votes we picked up because they weren't going to compromise. A lot of it's like decisions made on the move like that, realizing what the best result you can get is at any given time, and sometimes tactics change.
That was a fascinating fight, one that you caught more than a little bit of flack over.
Yeah.
And but that's an example of being willing to compromise and your adversary overestimating their position, and as a result, they lost it all. And we got everything that we wanted, or more than we thought we would, as a result of their miscalculation. And you guys did a really good job because that was a very fast moving situation that really all played out on the floor in a pretty short period of time, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, and you had to really gauge people changing their mind just based on how they were acting on the floor, not in front of the mic, but just in terms of, when we realized the speaker looked very perturbed at the Democrats, we realized that he wasn't going to try to whip votes against our amendment anymore, and we realized we could get the votes. And it was when the Democrats were talking, we were going person to person for all of the votes that we thought might be in question, engaging it. And when we realized we had flipped enough votes because of the Democrats' irrational position, we knew we could go forward with it, and we did.
Man, see that in my mind is where that's the fun part of legislating, right? When you get to see things like that happen and get to play it out in real life. That's pretty cool stuff.
I love it. You got 150 people, different things motivate them. You have 150 different personalities, and that's what you're trying to do is just move votes in your direction. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's got to be one of those moments that when you get that thing done, you're like, this is why we came down here. This is why I'm here.
We got so many of that last session. I mean, it's Mark Jones from Rice University did an analysis of our voting records, and he does the liberal to conservative, but he also does an analysis of win rates, right? So it's the amount of times each legislator was on the winning side of the vote. So naturally, if you'd think Republicans would be on the winning side more than Democrats because you're passing Republican legislation. They found in Strauss's first term, the Democrats were on the winning side about 95% of the time, and the Republicans significantly less. Even when there was a 2/3 Republican majority, the session before I came in, the Democrats were on the winning side of about 95% of the votes, the Republicans about 85%, with the conservative Republicans about 30 to 40. So, the last session, because of what we did, if you look, the Democrats just all dropped down to 40% on the graph. And the Republicans, even the conservatives, are up over 75%, with most Republicans being around 90, 95. So everything changed last session. No graph shows what we did last session more than that. We were passed, and keep in mind, this is not eliminating bipartisanship. Democrats agreed with 40% of the bills, nearly 50% of the bills, but we were passing Republican legislation a significant amount of time.
Well, it was definitely the most exciting session that I've got to see since I started working full time in this field back in 2009. And it was just a blast to watch you guys. I mean, I can't say how many hours I spent with the floor committee hearings up, getting to actually enjoy what was going on, because things were happening. Stuff that we've been fighting for nearly a decade was actually getting done.
I know, it was amazing. Pro-life bills, best session we've had since Roe v. Wade. Now you know why the Democrats were so angry at us by the last day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it was. There was a whole lot of animosity built up over 139 days.
I know. We've been beating them so badly over 139 days. The 140th day, I think everything exploded.
Well, I love the fact that you guys you didn't get weary in the fight, because for some of y'all in the Freedom Caucus came in 2010, a lot more in 12, even more of y'all with your class in 14, and y'all were willing to go and keep going back and keep fighting. And thankfully that resulted in it took a couple of years, but you got some incredible stuff done. And I'm excited. Hopefully we're gonna even have a bigger opportunity in 19 next year. With sending you and a bunch of your classmates back. Let's as we're kind of wrapping up here, though, let's shift a little bit. I'd love to hear any advice. A lot of our listeners are folks that are younger, that are thinking about either helping campaigns, want to run their own, want to help as consultants or campaign staff. What are some of the things that they need to be looking at in themselves, as well as the people they're working with, to help make sure that they're staying on the right path? And then two, for the candidates, what are a couple of things that they can be doing now to prepare for when they eventually pull that trigger? Because that was something you did a lot of good work on, preparing the ground well in advance of actually running for office.
Yeah. For campaign workers, people just trying to get into politics, and for candidates too. I mean, you really have to know what you believe, know what your principles are, because, the way they make moderates into you isn't by, thinking you're shifting your principles. It's by convincing you that the easiest path to take is the right one. And that's often how, people get guided on the wrong path. It's the one that's easiest for you. So know your principles and be willing to fight and sacrifice for it, because no part of this is easy at all. And half the time when we're in it during session, we're taking the path that's worse for us personally. And we have to justify it. And it's a tough thing to do. Also, when people are getting involved in elections and campaigns, I say just do it. The best way to learn is just by doing it. When somebody wants to run for office, most people lose their first time, but they learn so much in doing it. It's just like any job. You learn by doing, and the people you'll meet in doing it will be, the people who will help you next time. So you just got to get out there and put yourself out there.
I love it. Well, and we've talked to a number of other folks, like I mentioned, Matt Krause, that he ran that first time. He lost, but he learned from it and he won. You have a very similar story. You talked to folks like Connie Burton that spent years working in the trenches with candidates, helping support them before she ever felt called to run or had the opportunity to do that. Both are great ways to learn a lot about campaigns, to see up close what it takes, and to build good relationships with friends you're going to need. And of course, if you're in the Dallas area and want to volunteer and get your hands dirty that way, you can just go to mattrinaldi.com, and he's got a general election coming up. You can jump in and help knock some doors with him and his bride. And we'll have all the information, Matt, for folks to be able to reach out to you and learn more about you in the show notes, so folks can check that out. Any final words for folks?
Nope. Just if you're thinking of being a candidate, please do it. If you're thinking of being a volunteer, I got lots of spots for you in November. I'm going to be one of the biggest targets in the state of Texas, not because my district's the closest, but because of everything we got done last session and how successful we were.
I love it. Well, Matt, thanks for what you do. Please give your bride our thanks as well. I know she's a huge part of keeping you in the fight. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from my campaign coach.